Okay, and welcome to the very first Martial Awaken the Warrior podcast. And every episode we have a theme and a topic. And this week it's the archetypes, which originated with Carl Jung and then his research into dreams and archetypes from tribes. And who better to talk to us about the archetypes and his journey is Grandmaster Paul Mracek from Australia. And this man has a ton of martial arts qualifications and background. For example, he's an 8th Dan black belt in Taekwondo, an 8th Dan black belt in Taekwondo Jitsu, a 6th Dan black belt from the Taekwondo Academy in Malaysia, and a 4th Dan black belt in WTF from Korea. He's an international instructor from defensive tactics, pressure points, international coach of the open circle fighting method, and multiple black belts in Hapkido, kickboxing, and weapons, and various other. And interesting other martial arts styles that he has studied is Hapkido, Jiu-Jitsu, Chongdukwan, kickboxing, Okinawan Kenpo karate, Torito Jutsu, and Tai Chi. He's also taught in Australia, Malaysia, the Philippines, India, Cyprus, and England. And he's trained in Australia, Malaysia, England, Cyprus, China, Hong Kong, and Thailand. He's researched in America, Australia, China, India, Japan, Okinawa, Indonesia, Malaysia, England, and Germany. And he has been a keynote speaker in Australia, America, Brazil, England, India, Malaysia, and France. He has many honors as well. He's an Innovation and Resilience Award winner, even for COVID, as recently as that, Volunteers for Victoria 2020, and he was the team leader. And the Australasian Martial Arts Hall of Fame recipient, which is not easy to get into. There's a ton of paperwork as well as workshops to do. And he was inducted in 2019. And the World Karate Union Hall of Fame recipient, and inducted in 2019. Black Sash Award of Excellence from the Shaolin Temple, Kung Fu, and MAA. He's also a counselor from the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Standards, and also Business Quality Award winner in 2007. So many achievements. And Paul is also a CEO, an author, a trainer, coach, a consultant, a master black belt, and successful businessman, of course, with qualifications in engineering, management, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnotherapy, and coaching. He is a master communicator and continues his research into advanced martial arts principles combined with defensive tactics for the community, to professional and thousands of security officers learning his training programs. He's always developing, and he will carry on, I think, into the future for the traditional Chinese medicine principles. And he has additional qualifications in meditation, mindfulness, Bowen therapy, sports training, acupressure, and is a Reiki master teacher in addition. So he's published a ton of books and loads of articles, and many videos, over 70 plus educational videos also for self-defense and for the general public and the community. And one of his most famous quotes is, "The secret to success is consistency of purpose, readiness for responsibility, and then taking action. Knowing, not thinking, doing, not trying, achieves dreams." And this is a quote directly from Paul Mracek. So without further ado, let's speak to Paul, the man himself. How are you, Paul?
I'm good, thank you. I think I need a bit more white hair, as we were just saying after all that.
Yeah, it might turn you a little bit whiter after all that information that came back at you, but a ton of achievements, and we're interested in your story, obviously. And of course, the podcast is about archetypes, but let's go back to the beginning. And how did you really come across the first insight into archetypes when you were young or when you were a teenager? So please tell us a bit about your start with that.
Look, I think most people are, when they get involved in watching martial arts on movies or seeing it, they're always looking to be able to be the warrior. We all want to be the person out there who's the hero, being successful or saving the damsel, so to speak. in terms of those issues. So I think that we all start off with the same approach of wanting to be a warrior as for that, and then learning those activities and those things, the techniques, and then hopefully the principles behind those techniques to take us further so that we can do those things that we see ourselves. I mean, the whole purpose of this, of course, is about self-confidence and self-esteem. So we're looking to improve our self-esteem of our standing with our peers as we go through part of those issues. So that's just where I've started from it. I started when I'm in my teenage years. Got a little bit distracted when I went to uni to become an engineer for those things, and then finding a job, and then really got back into it after I started having kids, and then started to see that I needed for them to learn for their self-confidence in those issues for themselves. And that's when I got back into it more in a big way, rather than, like we most do once or twice a week prior to that situation occurring.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. So what does it mean for you exactly, the warrior archetype? What does that represent, and why do we need it?
Well, the warrior archetype, to me, rather than being person that goes out and, wins fights, it's more about taking action, achieving the things that you're looking to do. You set a goal for yourself, and then how do I achieve those goals, and how do I feel good about myself because I'm achieving those things that I think that I want to have, whether that be a materialistic thing, whether it's a new computer or a phone, a car, whatever else it may be. Those sorts of things is about setting goals and then achieving those goals so that you know that you can do whatever you want to do. And I mean, that's really where martial arts comes in, is that you are always setting goals for yourself and achieving those goals as we go through, whether you're doing belt levels or certificates, whatever it may associated with it. And I think that's where you learn from martial arts, is that you have to go through this cycle of learning, not getting it right, then making fine tuning and trying again, demonstrating it again. So the issue of you constantly learning as part of that process. I've said quite often that martial arts teaches you that you have to fail to succeed. So you have to fail everything you do first to succeed for it. And definition of fail is first attempt in learning. So you're doing that aspect. In engineering, we have the same thing. We call it the PCDA cycle: plan, check, do, act. So you have the same principles being applied, but on different names or different terminology that we use through it. And that's one of the things that I've noticed, is people find it really hard to transfer the descriptive activities that you do in different parts of your life as part of that, to be able to then say, well, how do I apply this in a different area of my life for it? And that's where people struggle to see, because they look at the technique rather than the principles. And so the warrior teaches you actions. It teaches you how to understand those principles to achieve the outcomes that you're looking for, and to teach others, or to teach others as well, because you've got to take people along with you. You can't do everything yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. And that ties in with the king energy as well, that the sovereign, as we said before, is the one who's helping the warrior to balance things out. How does that play out for you?
Well, you need a leader. So the sovereign, the king is the sovereign, is the leader who's setting the overall parameters about where you want to go, how you go about it. So the direction, vision and mission, you need to have what vision where you're going, and the mission is to achieve that outcome. And then how do you strategize that particular approach? How many resources do you need? How many warriors do you need? Do you need one, or you need 20, and in what sequence do you need them? The leader is there to be able to do that and ask the questions. Quite often I say, what's the difference between a manager and a leader? And everyone always comes up with these great long definitions that they think they should be saying or doing. And the simple difference is, a manager tells people what to do. So he accepts all the responsibility to do it. And if it goes wrong, everyone turns around and says, well, you told me to do it. Whereas a leader will ask questions and get people to engage, and then they take ownership for it because they feel like they're part of the team. So the leader is providing them with the support and the understanding about what they should be doing for it, and then they take responsibility and ownership for those issues. It's great to take action, but if you take the wrong action, then it doesn't help you. So the leader installs that in people, the vision about where they're going, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they have that philosophy behind them in terms of how they're going about it.
Yeah, that's exactly basically how we teach it as well, that the king is given the vision, given the 5-year plan or the 2-year plan, and then how many operators or warriors do they want to
Yeah,
employ on that goal, on that vision as well.
correct.
So yeah, good stuff. So it ties in with the engineer architect, because I always wanted to ask you, before, you started as an engineer, as a very practical person and very
Yeah,
pragmatic and extremely, black and white.
still am.
Yeah, but you're a little bit more open-minded now because of your transformation, I think, with your previous mentor. Could you tell us how you transformed from this very practical, pragmatic engineer to this more, esoteric, kind of well-balanced approach?
For those for us who teach and practice martial arts, we all know it's about pain compliance. So it was to do with a lot of pain.
Sometimes there's no choice. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Well, I mean, I when I went into the martial arts with my kids and we started to do a lot more often, the practical side of it in terms of the techniques and things where I found relatively easy. In terms of learning and understanding them, in terms of the issues, and because having, going 5 times a week, 3 hours a day, to classes and things outside, you sort of, with practice, you do it regularly in terms of those issues.
Yeah.
Very typical, like Tony Robbins, I said, was asked once, how come you got so good so quickly? And he said, I do in a week what everyone else does in a month.
Yeah, precisely.
So he's running, 3 sessions a day where everyone's doing 3 sessions a week. So he learned very quickly what works and what doesn't work because of repetition. So when the more repetition you do, like we said, with the cycle, you learn what to do, what not to do, and you can accelerate your learning process. When it comes to the old 3 inches above the eyebrows, in terms of the mindset, it's a completely different issue. And one of the struggles that I was finding with is when we got into the more esoteric activities about energy, how does energy work, how the flow from traditional Chinese medicine works through the body, and what's the relationship between blood and energy through the system. I was having a real struggle because my answer was always, from a scientific point of view, well, prove it to me.
Practical.
Show it to me. How do you prove it? Where's the scientific research for it, et cetera, et cetera. So that went on for a good 5 years.
So you're annoying the stuff out of them for a while.
Yeah.
Many questions. How does this work? Why?
And the good part in the end of that, of course, after that 5-year period is of doing that, is I found a lot of scientific research and practical engineering philosophy behind that I could apply to it. So, when people ask me things these days, I say, would you like the Western approach or would you like the Eastern approach? Which one would you prefer?
That's very good. That's good.
So you can relate that to people a lot easier. But anyway, my head instructor at the time, who's passed away since, he looked at me one day in desperation or frustration, I'm not sure which, and he said to me, you always ask me for me to prove to you why or how does that work? And he said, how about we swap that around and turn the coin around the other way? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, when you are doing a master's thesis or a doctorate, you create a hypothesis that says that if this happens, then you expect the following circumstances to occur, and then you go about and you either prove or disprove your hypothesis as part of your thesis. And he said, well, look at it from that you're doing a master's or a PhD. As we both talk about, it's pretty much what we're doing anyway. Once you get past the black belt, you start getting the low ones you do. And he said, why don't you assume and try for a month that everything I've been telling you is true and correct? And based on the fact that you assume it's true and correct, then how would you think and how would you react and how would you feel?
Yeah, good reframing.
Basic reframing NLP. So not that I was doing that at that stage. And then I did that. And then as a result of doing that, I then found that I suddenly became aware of certain things that I hadn't been aware of before, because now my mindset was different in terms of what I was looking and perceiving. So it's the old question of does perception become before awareness, or does awareness become before perception? And then I found that once I did that, I then made quite quick breakthroughs in what I was doing, because all the things that I had suddenly put up as roadblocks in front of myself had disappeared, because now I was now assuming that those things were true and correct. So I no longer spent time and effort on that, but I was able to then move to the next thing, which was then understanding things, because the landscape changed suddenly in terms of the way that I was seeing things.
Right.
And that was really the big breakthrough that allowed me to connect to my mind from the logical left side to the more creative right side, and then get in contact with things as part of that process and understand and get to feel the energy, what's happening with the energy around me and how that applies when I'm dealing with it. So it took me a good 5 years to get to that point.
Yeah, I think I'm coming in the opposite direction. And I wanted to speak about how you balance this, the yin and yang of this practical dreamer, because Bruce Lee once described himself as a practical dreamer, which I like very much. That seems to be a good goal, for most people, to be a practical dreamer. How would you respond to that?
I'll do it from a more Western perspective, just so that the average person can understand, because that's generally where they tend to be. And that is that you have both a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. The conscious mind is the practical aspect of it, because it's there to confirm all the things that you think you know. Right?
Okay.
So you take data and information through your conscious mind, and then based on your experiences and your knowledge base that you have, you try to justify or verify your thought process as part of it. You then have your unconscious mind, and your unconscious mind doesn't have that restriction. So if you allow your unconscious mind to take the things and then just take with what it sees, and then look and then allows it to expand that out without letting the conscious mind get involved and say, oh no, that's rubbish, that doesn't work.
No filter.
And take those filters out of the system, then you become more of a dreamer in those aspects of it, in terms of those issues. And I think Carlos Castaneda, who wrote the first of the books in regards to the Yaqui Indians taking the cactus juice to go off into these different dream worlds, wrote that very well in regards to the approach that he takes as part of that. But you don't have to take drugs to do that, right? Like he used it in the 1970s, which was when it was in past the 60s.
In vogue,
but you can do the same thing, which is where the NLP comes through with the trance aspects through meditation. So through meditation, you can be in an unconscious state, but be consciously aware of it, and without the filters of the conscious mind, then that allows you to be able to do that. Now, a good example of that is being in the flow. So an elite sportsman is in the flow, and they are able to connect directly to what their training is, without the conscious mind saying, oh, you haven't got enough sleep, or you've got too many injuries, or whatever, all the negativity going on. So they bypass that and access directly into the training memories, and then therefore they're in that dream state. And being conscious with it at the same time. And that's how
almost in a dream and awake in the dream, which is a very nice place to be, isn't it?
And you can do that relatively easy once you start to understand breath cycles. The transition of flow is in the alpha state, when you transition from beta to alpha, which is around 10 hertz. And if you do your breathing cycle as you do with meditation, which we also do in martial arts, when you adjust your breathing cycle, you change directly your brainwave frequency, because they're directly related, and then you can click into the alpha state, which is the flow state, which is that transitional when just before you sort of go to sleep. So once you understand that science behind it, which is the practical side, you can then apply that and use that more regularly to achieve it when you want to do it, to get into that dream state, which allows you to access more information and knowledge that you have around you as part of that process. So it's really quite interesting and usable in a practical environment.
And it really helped you with the martial science, for example, traditional Chinese medicine as well.
I mean, from that point of view, I suddenly was able to break that thing and say, well, show me energy, right?
Where are the meridians? Where's the energy? Where is it?
And to the point that I now can feel it, and I can feel it. I know when it's happening. I can feel the change in pressure for it. And by the way, there has been quite a number of researchers, which I was just doing recently, about a month or so ago, in Korea in the 1960s. They were able to actually measure, or were able to document through visual cameras, the flow of energy through meridians. And around
there was
the
even
1960s.
open heart surgery with traditional Chinese medicine that's been recorded.
Yeah. So there's a few things that have been out there that is not well published, but once you start getting into some of the publications that are around, you actually can find quite a bit about it. So science is, as my founder, head instructor used to say, he says, science is catching up to what we've been doing in martial arts, for thousands of years.
Right.
For
Even
that
with
process.
quantum physics and with, I mean, it is martial science at the end of the day anyway, isn't it? There's nothing magic about it. So it is science. Okay. This leads nicely into, we discussed a little bit about the warrior and the king. And I believe one of your nicknames was the father, kind of as a, almost as the father archetype, but also you're very interested in being a healer as well as the kind of shaman, which is the magician kind of archetype. Could you tell us a little bit about healing first, and then a little bit about your nickname of the father?
The nickname, the what I found was that when I got into more of the energy work and the amount of power that you could generate from that, which we've both experienced through some of the training camps that you and I have been to, you realize that it's really easy to hurt someone. And the struggle I had was that I kept running out of training partners. So at
3%, yeah.
So I said, well, and this is not going to work too good because no one wants to train with you.
No one wants to play with you, Paul.
Especially when you start hitting, the vital points and pressure points on a regular basis. So I then went down the track of, well, how do you heal a person and what do you do? And pressure points have both the healing aspect, which is the acupuncture that you see, and can be used in a martial perspective in terms of, and it's all about angle and direction and speed and a few other things. So I started going down the healing mode and started to look into that, and then you sort of realize that you have a coin which has two sides. One side's warrior, the other side's healer, and they have to, like yin and yang, they have to be in balance. So you need to know when to use what in terms of those aspects, in terms of those issues. So I got into the healing side of things. Then I went off and did Bowen therapy, which is looking at the fascia of the muscles and taking in inflammation in the body. And then got into the TCM, into a range of other different things in terms of Jijo, which is a Japanese version of it. And then I got into Reiki, and then Reiki, through the different levels of Reiki, for it to be able to understand how all that work. And then when I got that, then you got a better feel for the people that are around you, but you can also then sense where there's an issue or a problem in a body when someone's in front of you as well at the same time. So then you could hit a person, heal them, hit a person, heal them, and they felt good, and you still got your training.
Non-stop cycle. Just wake them up, knock them out, wake them up. So you see yourself also as a bit of a shaman as well,
I see that comes back from our founder. I mean, we see ourselves as being like the old masters, one-stop shop type of thing. So you needed to learn about the healing before you learned about the others. And then most of the problems that people have are to do with how they think and the approach that they have and the stress that they put themselves under. They're always in that sympathetic nervous system response where they're in a heightened state of awareness because of pressure that they are on their work or their job or their family at home. So I got involved into that area. We also had some learning issues with originally when my kids were younger, they had a couple of learning issues. So that's why I went into the NLP issue. And then the NLP side of things, I got more and more interested and realized that, because you deal with people all the time, you needed to really understand how people take information in and respond to it. And, one of the things we often say is, there's a difference between what the definition of communication and what the meaning of communication is. So the issue that you see is that people always focused on what the definition of communication is, whereas the meaning is that if you don't get the response that you want, then you're not communicating. So if you want to get a different outcome, then you need to change how you say things. And so depending on a person, whether they're a visual, kinesthetic, or auditory in the way that they take in information, you then have to change the way that you transmit that information to them in the same words. So that's when I went in from looking after a multinational as an MD, and then I went into my own consulting business. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be consulting, I might as well make sure I can communicate with people properly.
Yeah.
So that's
go the
why I went
whole
down,
way. That's it. Yeah.
that's when I went down the NLP track, and then did, hypnotherapy and timeline therapy and all that sort of stuff. And that's when I got to know people, how to speak to them, how to develop them, see what they do.
Yeah.
And that's when the nickname came in, because I was looking after a couple of plants overseas in Southeast Asia and Thailand. And we used to work with people and get people to come along. As we said, as a leader, you need to get people to come along and take responsibility. You can't do everything yourself.
Yeah.
And make them feel that they've added value to the issues about what they want to do. And I found out afterwards, after I'd been with them for a number of years, and I was just about to leave because I was going on to do my own consulting business. And they said, we have a nickname for you, and the nickname is Father. So we know that every time you come along, we can talk to you and say things to you. I mean, I even had one lady who, a young, very intelligent, well qualified lady who was very, very attractive too. And she said, she asked me my permission if she could marry one of the guys who was an expat. And she said, I wanted your permission before I'm allowed that I can marry him.
She asked you for his hand in marriage from the father figure.
Yeah, basically. And I was really taken back by it. And I sort of said, well, of course, I mean, you don't need to ask my opinion, friend. She says, no,
to confirm, just to confirm. And to be diplomatic.
That's right.
That leads on to one of my favorite stories that you have, Paul, is about the woman who had the healing problem, the injury. Could you just run over that again, please?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you find out when you start dealing with people is that the problems that people have is associated with significant emotional events that they have in their life.
Yeah.
And people see their lives as being from when they're born to when they die. Right. What they don't see is that you have past lives. Now, a lot of people poo-hoo that, and a lot of people don't, because they think
the idea.
And they also have, where you have these lives prior to where you are now, and you bring these issues over into your current thing in terms of what you want to do. So anyway, as part of one of the NLP things, we do a breakthrough session, which is what we call timeline therapy. And the idea is to go back you're in a trance state, but not full hypnosis. And you go back and you say to the person, can you go back either in the current life or a past life into where you had that first significant emotional event? And then this person's gone back. I think it was something like around 8 past lives.
Eight past lives. Wow.
Yeah, 8 past lives, and had gone back to this situation where they were fighting a battle on a field, and the woman was a man in this case. Yeah. And during this battle, she was lanced in the chest, where the pain was.
Wow,
in regards to the things, and she's always had this pain, but she can never quite find out why, and the doctors can never find anything associated with it.
Yeah.
And then when we went back and found out what the issue was, and then said, okay, what was the learning from this, and then try to bring this all through, then the pain disappeared, and then she never had the pain after that in terms of the issues.
And you see, this is coming from the mouth of an engineer. So for those of you who are skeptical, there was no one more skeptical than Paul at the outset of the stories, but now he's a bit more open-minded. So obviously, this stuff is important to be integral, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the fact is, I've done hundreds of timeline therapies since then, and it's not something that was a one-off. I think the maximum I've had a person go back is 13 past lives in regards to that, and you can see the situation where people's lives are changed so dramatically after that is just amazing as part of the process, and you are. Know that you're helping individuals and people within the community when you see those sorts of things that are happening for it as part of that process. I mean, you're only here, you come into a person's life for a short period of time. You're there to for a reason, and they're presented to you for a reason, because you both learn. As they say, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. Yeah. So when you have a white belt in front of you, you learn from the white belt as much as they learn from you. Yeah. And it's the same thing when you're doing coaching with people and the archetypes that we're doing. You're learning about yourself as part of that process as much as they're learning about themselves and understanding and opening things. So
absolutely. The archetypes, and then this ties in with going back to countless lives before, because this is in our DNA, and this does go back to tribes. Every tribe had a king, every tribe had a warrior, every tribe had a magician, a shaman, every tribe had lovers, which is the protector, the mother type as well for the babies and the partners. So these show up all the time. So it's I think an important thing to combine them. They should be in harmony, right? They shouldn't be in fighting within you.
Yeah, correct.
They should be integrated. So can you tell us a bit about your integration? Are you nearly there yet? I think it's a nice journey, isn't it? I think you told me your wife said he practices what he preaches, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a work in progress for us all in terms of those issues. I mean, life sets up all these different conditions, as we know, with COVID. You see people who are struggling very difficultly with it, and others who are doing okay for it. But I think the issue is you do the best you can with the resources you have available. And if you look back and say, could I have done something different? The answer, of course, you could, because you've got more knowledge when you do that. Right. But if you do the best you can at that time with what you know, then you shouldn't be hard on yourself. But the other thing is you understand that you need to learn and continue to learn as part of those processes. And I think it's not a I am a leader, or I am a warrior, or I am this. It's depending upon the circumstances that are presented to you as part of the process. So as you're working through, and we have 6 areas of life, we don't just have our life that we think as one. We have our family life, we have our work life, we have our relationships, our social, we have our spiritual life, we have contribution with the community that's around us, and we have different needs in those areas. They're similar, but they'll have different needs. And we need to understand that as those needs and those areas of life we're transitioning through, depending on a day, we will be different archetypes depending on what there is.
Yes,
however, that doesn't mean the purpose of who we are and what we want to do changes. And I think
the core doesn't change. You have the principles and values, but the archetypes help you, I think, around the core.
Correct. And as we were talking about before with Henry Ford, one of the things I said about Henry Ford was he says your purposes stay the same, but your methods change. Yeah. And it's truly the case. Your methods change as you go through as part of those issues. From a martial arts perspective, if I've got a kickboxer in front of me versus I've got a karate guy, or I've got someone who's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, I'm not going to use the same technique on these 3 guys, because, you're going to end up having a very bad day if you're going to use the same thing.
Strategies, different strategies, exactly. Yeah.
So different approach, different issues, and that transition from one to the other is important. And also understanding that, you have these core issues of things where you have to understand who you are yourself, have self-mastery about what you can and can't do. Especially as you get older, and then the confidence about knowing who you are, rather than picking up what other people are saying about you and saying, for whatever reason, and then believing it, which is not true. So you have to have that self-mastery. Then you have the influences, which are the people that you deal with around you, and knowing how to interact with those, which is where we talked about communication and relationships. And then you have the environment factor, which is the environment that you're working in, whether it's COVID, whether it's, in another cultural dimensional area, whether it's in, you're in India or Brazil or Europe, wherever else it may be.
The environment affects everything as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you have how you integrate all 3. And make that all 3 work together as part of the process is important. And a very practical example of that is that if you have an employee, a boss, and a company, they each have their own objectives. The company objective is one thing, the boss's objective is another quite often, and then the objective of the employee is different. If none of those 3 things align at any point, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
But if you can, as a coach or a counselor or a boss or leader, if you can find the sweet spot where all 3 meet, then you have a point where you're going to be able to add value for everyone as part of that process. And it's the old win-win-win situation that you get. So it's understanding that approach and how do you apply it, and then which archetype is necessary for that to be able to get them to work. That's the key.
And it's a great resource to go through, isn't it? When you need one, that should come, and then the other one needs to go on holiday for a while, and then the other one needs to take over. We always say it's like riding a Harley Davidson. Who's riding it? Who's driving, or who's riding today? Who needs to be in charge today? There needs to be another one that you show. And of course, we shouldn't forget the the women, the ladies, their archetypes are, of course, queen, Amazon, lover, and mystic. So, of course, you know, there are female versions of the archetypes that are the same.
Yeah. I always
do you want to talk a little bit about women, Paul?
Yeah. I like to think about it. The fact is that we're all human beings and we have a slightly different approach that we take associated with it. We are wired differently in terms of the way that we see things. And when you do a lot of the NLP stuff, you start to look about how you approach things differently because of, you know, men speak in command language, women speak in question language, and for those areas. So you have to approach it differently in terms of the way you speak, and have intonation patterns about the approach, and your body language has to be slightly different for it. And then you find it works quite well. Well, one of the things I quite often say is that what we have a struggle in the world is that you need to have a direction first, and then you need to have someone that implements that direction. And you'll find in history that you'll always have these deities, which will always be generally females, who have the ideas and the direction about what is going to be done. And then you have the people that implement them under direction, which is usually the males. So that's when I usually see, if you look back in history and you do any historical research, you'll see in a lot of cases that is the case in that situation. Now, I have a lot of conversations about that with people on a regular basis about it because they have different opinions. But I find that that's generally an interesting way to look at it. And if you take that as a consideration, you find that you interact quite easily in terms of those issues.
Yeah, I think we have common themes, and it's just different names, you know. So obviously the different name resonates, as you say, sovereign you like for yourself, or sage, these words, and everyone can choose actually their own version of warrior or version of king and sovereign. Because some people who don't like royalty, for example, they like captain, you know, instead of king. Just the captain of my life, you know, not the king. So they change this way and that. Okay, great stuff. So yeah, this is the shaman and the magician. Let's talk a little bit about the magician as a kind of thinking out of the box creativity, and also, of course, the magician archetype is helping the warriors and the kings, makes everyone laugh, and comes up with solutions that everyone thinks, well, that's so easy. I didn't see it. It was on my, you know, in front of my nose, basically. And the magician should be a bit magic, right? We all need a little bit of this magic kind of solution.
Yeah, I mean, magic is an interesting word associated with it. I mean, it's a bit like the difference between innovation and invention. You know, if you take something from one industry and apply it into another, it looks like magic because people go, my God, how did you come up with that? So it really is a matter of you taking the knowledge that you learned. As we know, power is applied knowledge, not just knowledge. And applying that knowledge, and applying that knowledge to another area where it hasn't been seen before, because they're entrenched in their thinking process, so they don't see outside the box in terms of those issues. I mean, we've talked about that before, that if you have a problem, people have a problem, it's sitting here, right in their face, and then you have to get the problem away from you to be able to see the solutions around those things. So when so when people have got problems within an industry or a particular issue in their family, whatever, it's because they're so emotionally connected to it, they don't give them chance of space to be able to disconnect and be able to see the solutions that are available in front of them. So that's where I see being the issue. And innovation for me is value, is change that adds value. So if you're not adding value, so you don't need to change it. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't need to. And the magic is that people suddenly believe that and see it as part of that process in terms of what you want to do. And finding solutions is the key. How do you apply, as you said, the magician is really finding solutions that are unique in terms of solving a problem that no one else has seen before.
Like that, and they find it so quickly, and it's so obvious to the magician.
It is because they understand. It is for them because they understand principles which are beyond what other people have. You know, it's a bit like how do you say to people, how do you think outside the box? You know, a magician thinks outside the box. So how do you actually think outside a box? Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a question of everything is nonsense in some way for the magician. It's all nonsense, you know. It's all cloaks and daggers and smoke screens, and it's an illusion. We're living in a kind of matrix. And the magician comes into the business meeting, just says, well, why don't you just try that? And everyone says, oh, I would never have thought of that. And they can come in. I mean, we have a technique where we say, how many ways are there to leave an office and come back in? And so you get people brainstorming that. And one of the solutions was, well, you go out of the office backwards, you jump out of the window, you catch a plane to Sydney, then you catch another plane to Honolulu, then you go to Hawaii, back to Belgium, you come back in through the normal elevator. And, and that's a way to go out and come back in. There are a million ways that you could possibly solve something. And the magician is just there with a million possibilities. So I like the way they all tie in. So can you tell me any recent example, how you tied in these archetypes? Or last year during COVID, for instance?
Well, the key that I usually give with people is two starts with two things. One is firstly, you need to have a self mastery challenge, and that is to get to know yourself, but you become the leader. You have to become the leader of yourself to be able to know where you are, rather than if you continually follow everyone else and value yourself through other people's eyes, you're never going to be able to see what you can actually achieve. So the first thing for people is to be able to be a leader of themselves and understand what their true purpose is, what they're here for, what are they trying to do for it. And then the second one is make sure that they become the warrior, which means they make a plan, then they actually implement the plan. And having that persistence. Many people, especially during COVID, we found they just drop their bundle and say it's all too hard, and then they give up. So you need to be persistent. As we say with the martial arts, when you become if you're doing a technique, you need to do a good technique at least 10,000 times to be good at it. So does that mean for 9,999 times you're a failure? And the answer is no. But you are continually improving as part of that process. What's the difference between 9,999 and 10,000? Is little in terms of issues, but you suddenly have a better understanding about what you do and as part of that process. And then looking at that as part of those things to see what unique solutions you can provide, which is meeting the needs of other people for it, and understanding what the other person's going through and what they need to do as part of that, and how you integrate your knowledge base associated with it for it. So when you just said, what for example, what process did we have as part of that during COVID? Was with the volunteering work that I was working at, we were finding that we had to make sure that we had the shutdowns, and then how do we provide service to people without being physically face to face. Right. And within a week, we had developed a system. We're using Zoom. Everyone knows that. Connected to an online booking system, which interconnects between the two. Then connected that up through Gmail and Google Mail activities for it. Did a training program for it. Trained everyone associated with it, and started running those things. Had an online system that we booked into it, and we ended up running 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, and did 1,200 sessions from August through to December. So the idea there was, we didn't start off, oh my God, it's too hard. We just said, let's see what's available, and don't try and reinvent. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Bruce, you said be like water, right? So adapt and flexible and overcome all these things, which leads us nicely to, you told me before that you were a justice of the peace. And for those of you who don't know, Paul does a ton of work for the community as well, and is often not paid for his work, a lot of charity as well. So can you tell us about the justice of the peace, and how that led you to be more charitable and help the communities?
I know it goes around the other way. I mean, you find that you want to help with people, and then you look at volunteering to support the community. So it goes the other way rather than that way. Sure. Because I got into martial arts and looking at, firstly myself, and then how to help others, and then how to heal people, and how do you help others, and then everyone wants to tell you their life story and the problems that they have, which is then you end up doing coaching and consulting and counseling as part of that. And then, of course, your community is made up, and especially in Australia, we have so many different multinationals. Me being one, being Czech background, and you then have all these different ideas about how you approach things and what you should do for those areas. And then, of course, the volunteer world, the world operates on volunteers, basically. So how can you help with volunteers? And through the business that I was doing at the time, they were looking for people to assist. And I just sort of naturally, I moved to a regional city for 5 years, and they were sort of saying, well, we need people to help with the region that we're in. And then I applied for that because they needed someone who could provide in that, and also could speak another language because I speak a bit of German and Czech, of Czech. And then that's how it sort of went into becoming a justice of the peace, and then helping out individuals and people through the process. And then I've just continued over those years. I think that's been one for about 18 years now. So
really? So it's been 18 years, and it's very rewarding, obviously, and you get a lot out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you're helping individuals and people for. I mean, one of the interesting things during COVID is that we've had such a diverse thing. You think about only in your country, but you forget about the fact that people in your country travel so much. So we're doing sessions with people in Colombia, in South America, Cambodia, UK, France, US, India. And we're getting people that are saying, I don't know what to do. I can't get the paperwork done. I need to submit my visa application, but I can't get it done because I'm not there or whatever. And you're able to now do that through the remote witnessing type activities that we were doing for it. So they provide that for the community and provide community service. I mean, the interesting part, we're living in a city versus living in a regional town is, in a city, you don't work and live in the same place. You don't get to know the people that are around you.
Right,
when you're when you work in a regional town, you live and work in the same people. You see them down the street when you see them at work. They know your kids, and their kids go with your kids to the school, and that's very, very grounding in regards to the issues. You have to take into consideration, the impact you have on people as a manager and as a leader about what you want to do and how you go about it, and which you don't generally tend to do when you're working in a large city, because you don't see the people. So it's a bit disconnected where it's not in the others. So it's very helpful in terms of doing that. And, we talked about the archetypes. I mean, you basically are transitioning through those archetypes when we're dealing with people, because you can get people who are very upset. They could have lost a loved one. You're trying to help them through their process of trying to be the executor for the wheel, or transition, trying to get access to payments so that they can continue. You could be doing the other side of that, where they've had a birth and a child, and they need a birth certificate to be endorsed, and so you get this wide range of things as you see through, and I think it makes you a better person as a result of that, because you're getting to see and understand what's happening in the community that's around you for those areas, and that's gratifying as part of the issue. So what do you get out of it? You just get out self-satisfaction. Where I said self-mastery is part of the issue that you need to look at, and that just gives you a better understanding.
And one of the old qualities that they used to teach as a true warrior in Japan and China, you had to have a lot of compassion. You were not considered a true warrior if you didn't have compassion. Protection for all living things. There was this basic Zen Buddhism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean the one of the things that I, when I go through and teach, is that and it's a bit old cliche, is that the fact is people need peace, love, and happiness, and those three qualities, no matter who you are, where you are, you still have it. Now you can call it different things. From a work environment, peace is security. I need to be secure that I have a job that I'm not going to do, which is a big issue under COVID. Being love is more about being valued in your role in your job, rather than, being taken advantage of. And, everyone wants to be happy in terms of the issues for it. You look at those, remember I said, you look at those different words and how it applies, and then how you attach those things to the process is important, because then you can see how you would then move through those archetypes to meet those needs for those particular individuals as you go through.
Yeah, you keep changing as you go. Exactly. Adapt and flexibility. Yeah, great stuff. And so when you were an engineer, you had this archetype of a leader. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a manager? How were you? Your management style? Were you strict or very understanding?
Well, I started off with being that I wouldn't ask people to do something if I couldn't do it myself.
Right.
So I used to make sure that I could do something myself before I asked someone else to do, which sort of took a lot of arguments out from people. Because if the boss could do something that you're asking him to do or show you how to do it, then you've connected. And if I didn't know, I'd go to the people and say, hey, you're the expert in this particular area. You've been doing it for 20 years. I've just came here. So you know more than I do. Can you please tell me what to do and how to go about it, and teach me as part of that process? So having that open-mindedness to be able to learn from people means that you treat the other person as an individual rather than an employee number, and you're showing them trust and respect. And I think that's the key. If you want respect, you have to give respect. I mean, one of the problems that I find in the martial arts areas is quite often a person gets a black belt and they say, well, I deserve respect because I'm a black belt, instead of saying you earn respect from others, and as a black belt you should realize that and understand that, rather than saying the opposite in terms of those issues. So I always found as a manager that initially for that's what be the case. Then I had to learn to make sure that I asked questions and listened, rather than trying to fill the gap in between with my voice. And then listen to what people were telling me. And then once you did that, you'd get connection, and people would then take responsibility and ownership. And then I found, over time, I found the easiest way to get people involved is to ask them their questions, see where they are, communicate, make sure that you do. One of the things I was in very unionized factories and businesses. And one of the things that I found was that people only went to the unions if they felt like they were never being communicated or listened to. Yeah, exactly. So I always found that if you did what they call a town hall meeting, which is the American terminology, that you got everyone together every 2 months, you'd tell them, this is a profit we made, this is a profit we didn't make, this is where we're at with problems, issues, etc. Tell them everything associated with what's going on. There's no point hiding profit, because if we make profit, everyone gains. So you have to be fair and reasonable about it. And every time you're fair and reasonable, people are fair and reasonable back to you. If you didn't do it within 2 months, they would then come up with their own stories in 3 months. So the extra month, they would always come up with a different story or something else.
Magician archetype,
yeah. You might as well get that. And quite often, I would invite, when we had those sessions, I'd invite the union organisers and so get them to sit up the front, and then do the presentation. So they're aware of it as well as anyone else. I mean, there's no point not being transparent within reason, but you try and be as transparent as reasonable. And you bring the people along for the journey, and that's the key in terms of those areas, in terms of the approach that you take.
So you were a manager, and then you became this, the grandmaster. And we spoke a little bit before about the grandmaster is really a grand teacher, is really a great teacher. And you met a few grandmasters along your way, and I think you told me they have 2 or 3 qualities in common. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, lack of ego is the one that you come across. When the one thing you've got is they have an openness to learn. If you ever want anything in a student, you, no matter who you are, you're always a student. Yes. And the one thing you always want is curiosity, burning curiosity. And the people I've come across, they have this real desire to learn, to understand. They don't think that they don't sit on their laurels and say, I know the best technique in the world, or I know the best thing here. Yeah. They look at things and they see how they can apply it. Remember, I talked about innovation before. They look for the innovation that they haven't seen. About how you approach it and what you do, and they're prepared to put on the white belt again, so to speak, and learn from someone. They don't tell you what they know. They try to speak to you and find out what you know, so that they can learn from those issues. And they're also very open to provide you with their knowledge.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so some of the best teachers I ever had, they never said, well, what I would do is, they said what you would do. Yeah. Yeah. It was a great way of them reframing it, that they would never say, well, you have to be like me. It's just, no, you're at this level, you can do that. I would suggest for you, the best way is that. Yeah. And they were just, fantastic teachers, because they didn't put the ego in, as you said. And it's also detachment. The warrior archetype should be slightly detached, objective, from the situation, not too emotionally involved.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good old saying that says, when feelings escalate to the intensity of emotions, all thought goes out the window.
Yeah. Indeed.
So that's the issue. If you allow your emotions to get too high, which means that you've got an attachment to what you're doing, then you don't see that you don't see the solution or the outcome associated with it.
Yeah, and that really works, doesn't it? Because everyone can testify to that. If you want something too much, you just don't get it. And it's maybe the case with the martial arts, with the business, with the money, with anything. You want it too badly, and you're going to make a mistake, right?
Yeah, correct. You got to detach. You have to detach for it
Yeah.
to be able to see. I mean, it's not like writing something. You talked about writing stuff before. Quite often, I'll write something and then I'll put it aside and I'll leave it for 2 or 3 days, and I come back to it and go, "Oh my God, how did I write that?"
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is what you told me before, that sometimes I mean, we've both had this experience that it's great to quote other people, but sometimes you come up with something, maybe it's the magician, and it's original, and someone wants to write it down, and you say, wow, actually that doesn't come from anywhere, that came from me.
Yeah.
So I'd love to do more of that kind of channeling, the original stuff that you could even say, well, that's really just from the air, that came out of nowhere. And you've had that experience a lot of times.
Yes, yeah. There's quite a few times that people ask me questions. I mean, and you just say, and you've connected to obviously someone who's got a higher intellect than me, and then has come through in terms of those issues for it. But as we say, sometimes when you answer the questions for those, the answer is for you as much as it is for the other person that you're trying to learn from something at the next step.
Definitely something is happening with that. There is a wisdom that does go back, or it's coming from somewhere else, because there's no way you could have prepared that. It just came out. So that's another interesting archetype. I would still call that the magician in some way, just as a basic core. Okay, fantastic stuff. So the archetypes, and what about the future, Paul? How do you see your integration and the rest of your everyone talks about way or journey, but there must be a better word, mission or purpose, or what's next?
The way I see it, I've always have seen it for quite some time, is that you have this cycle that you go through, which is, you try to be physically fit about what you do and learn the different things or different techniques and styles, and so you get physically fit. Then you look at your health. So am I eating properly? Am I doing the things properly? And you look after your security. So how do I do things to protect myself and others associated with it? And then you start to look, instead of looking internally, you start to look externally for those things. And this is where you then come through a transition of all those three and see how the three fit together. Like I talked about, self, influences, environment, which you can still use the same terminology. Those three then connect into what we call the higher self, so which is the spirituality side of things, which then you start to look about, how do I access these higher energy levels of things like you see with the yogis over in India and those sorts of things associated with it. So how do I understand how they approach? So doing research and talking to these people to be able to see the insights and understanding about where they're going and how do they achieve those is really the issue. And it's the old story, as we said before, the more you know, the less you know. So the more I start to find out about these things, the more I realize there's so much more information to find out for the issues as part of that process. I mean, it's like the old, I remember having this discussion with the founder, the fabled 108 points from the Shaolin about the 36 kill. The 36 kill points, the 36 main points, 36 knockout points, where are they, what are they, and how do you apply them and all that sort of stuff. And, I spent many years going through researching, Pat McCarthy, who's now here in Queensland, in Australia.
Fantastic.
He opened up, he opened up got some funding from the government and opened up a university that he has up there.
This is amazing. This is wonderful.
So you start reading his book and other versions of it. His is the Western Babushi as well. You start reading those things and you see part of it, and then you want to find out a bit more, and you start talking to other individuals and reach out to them. And then after you do all that, you put it all together, and then you go, well, okay, but they're there for a reason, a purpose behind them, and what do you do? So you take it the next step. And I think that's what we said before when we talked about the masters. We talked about that burning curiosity is to find out more and understand how it is. And on your way, your that self-mastery is what you're trying to find out as part of it. And if people can learn from that as you go through, it's great that you're trying to help other individuals in doing those issues. So for me, that's the direction. How do I help other people? How do I help them out into whether it's a practical environment, a martial arts environment, a healing environment in terms of those issues?
Yeah, this is great because it keeps coming back to the same thing, that you're a practical, pragmatic engineer, and also this spiritual side as well that's continually integrated. And the Grandmaster, I mean, I've always seen you as a bit of a professor. So when you got into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, I mean, even that nomination, even the work you did and the workshops you tried to, to get in there. I mean, all these titles sort of come together: Grandmaster, Hall of Fame, even Professor, the Father, and the Shaman. It's all about kind of titles, isn't it? So your story is, for me, this integration of all these type of titles, Manager and Father. So just tell us finally a little bit about the Hall of Fame process to get accepted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, getting nominated is, I suppose, is the first issue.
Well, that's the professor problem. To get nominated is the first thing.
Yeah. I mean, someone else, thinks enough of what you've done to be able to do that, and they nominate you as part of that process.
Right.
And I remember the person I spoke to me who nominated me, and I said, look, I haven't provided to the community as much as what I know this particular person has. Okay. And I said, all the things that you've done as part of the process you've done, I said,
right.
that surpasses anything that I've ever done. And he said to me, look, it's not just about what you've done in martial arts. It's also about what you've done within the community and and the industry and how you impacted on other people. And he says, you've done all these other things, which surpasses what I've done in those areas. Mm-hmm. So he said, you're more than a worthy person as a candidate in terms of those issues, because of those other things that you've done to support the community and helping those others. And I thought, okay. And then of course the problem is you then have to go back through your life, for
the bio. Yeah.
30,
I have the bio here.
Yeah. And I always cringe. I always cringe when people say that, because that's not what the issue is. It's a bit like our dojo. We never used to have certificates on the walls. And people would come in and and then they'd say, well, who are you and what have you done and what qualifications have you got to teach my kids and things? And you look at it and go, yeah, okay. So I suppose the certificates on the wall are not for me. The certificates on the wall for the person who comes in to make them feel good about the fact that they think they've got someone how to do it.
It's for the skeptic. They're only for the skeptic.
And it's the same thing when people ask me all the time, which is the best style? I say the one that you're happy with and the way they teach.
That's right. If you're not comfortable, you won't learn a thing.
That's right. Your kick's a kick, a punch is a punch. Okay, you do it one way, I do it the other.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, if you are teaching the person and they're prepared to listen and follow and do, then you'll get the outcome that they're looking for. So it really is a matter of how they teach and how you relate to them.
Yeah, well, congratulations for getting into the Hall of Fame, and thanks a million for the podcast. And we'll put a link down after the podcast for your website. And I've read a lot of your biography out, and I just would like to say that Paul has also helped our company, MaArtial, with articles and great advice and ideas, and so he's a very go-to guy for help or consulting as well. And a lot of the stuff he does is actually for free as well, even though he's very successful as well in business. So I hope we continue our cooperation, Paul. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks a lot. And at the end of the day, you're right. The archetypes, they basically go to one, this kind of person who's in control. They're integrated. So I think it's the Zen saying, not many things, but one. And then
correct.
That's almost the final stage where
you're
fully integrated. You're happy. You're going along. There's no conflict within you, and probably it takes a few years to get there, but we're all trying, right?
I agree. I totally agree with that, and I think it's the same with the NLP stuff. When I started first doing it, and they sort of say, "Well, how do you keep remembering everything?" And I said, "You have to make it part of your DNA." So you naturally transition from one to the other without thinking, which is the
archetypes. And that's it.
That's
they go right back to the Amazonian tribes, and they go right back to the Congo or wherever it is. And it's in us. So that's why I believe in the archetypes. And at MaArtial, we want to sort of wake up a couple of these archetypes, the warrior being the main one. So thanks a million, Paul. If you like the podcast, and please do the subscribe and like. And next time we've got another theme and another I think influential, great guy to interview as well on podcast. And I'm sure I'll speak to you soon, Paul. And thanks a million.
Okay.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye, Paul.